Saudi Arabia has just ditched the US dollar. One of the biggest moments in the history of the dominance of the US dollar was the Petrodollar Agreement between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States in 1974. Now, that agreement, the Petrodollar Agreement, has expired just recently on 9th June 2024 after 50 years. And the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, has decided not to renew that agreement. Now, what is Petrodollar Agreement? What impact will the expiration of this particular agreement have on the US dollar as well as other reserve currencies in the world? And does it mean that the dominance of the US dollar is now in danger? We are going to answer all of those questions in this video here. So please stay with us till the end of this video. If you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so that you do not miss our new videos. So let's get right into the video. Now, what is the Petrodollar Agreement? Now, the Petrodollar Agreement was an agreement wherein the US and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they came into an exclusive agreement wherein the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia had to export all of its crude oil to other countries in US dollars. Whatever crude oil related transactions that were conducted by Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the rest of the world, they had to be settled in US dollars. And in exchange, the US provided security and military assistance to Saudi Arabia. Now, this was one of the smartest moves that the US government actually played, because this move ensured the continuity of the dominance of the US dollar as well as the dominance of the US as a superpower. Now, this agreement took place after the US dollar was taken off of the gold standard, which was in place ever since the Bretton Woods Agreement took place in 1944. So, from 1944 to 1972, we had the gold standard in place, the Bretton Woods Agreement that happened, and ever since then, the Petrodollar Agreement was in place. Now, I've talked more about the Petrodollar Agreement, the rise and the dominance of the US dollar, as well as the rise of the BRICS nations in this video here. You can click the link in the description below. Not only was the Petrodollar Agreement a way for the US to establish and maintain the continuity of the dominance of the US dollar, but it was also a way for the US to sell its treasuries to the rest of the world and get the money back in terms of investments, thereby strengthening the economy of the US. Because this particular agreement, what it did was it denominated the value of crude oil in terms of US dollars. Now, what it did was it increased the demand of the US dollar in the world, because all the countries, if they had to purchase oil, they had to have US dollars in place, which increased its demand. And at the same time, the US also made sure that a part of the crude oil revenue that was received by Saudi Arabia was invested back into the US economy in the form of Saudi Arabia purchasing US treasuries. But Saudi Arabia was not the only oil exporting country that actually denominated the value of crude oil in terms of US dollars. Other countries, when they saw this particular deal, they also followed suit. They followed the lead of Saudi Arabia, and that is how all the crude oil that was bought and sold in the world, for the most part, it was transacted in the US dollars. So this was the strategy. This agreement actually played out really well for the US. But now that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has not renewed this contract, what does it mean for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Now, with the Petrodollar Agreement out of the equation, Saudi Arabia can now conduct transactions in multiple other currencies, including the yuan, the euro, the yen, to name a few of these currencies. So Saudi Arabia is not following exclusivity in terms of conducting and settling these transactions in the US dollars alone. Similar to the Petrodollar Agreement, there is also a concept of Petro Yuan. Now, what is Petro Yuan? So the People's Republic of China is actually the largest importer of crude oil in the world. And in order to increase the usage of yuan globally, China actually started leveraging its position as the largest importer in the world. And in fact, China even carried out oil-related transactions for the very first time in 2017 when it settled oil payments in yuan with Russia. And since then, there have been a few countries that have started accepting yuan as a mode of payment for exporting crude oil. Not only did Saudi Arabia not renew this particular Petrodollar Agreement, it also has joined the mBridge project. What is this mBridge project? Now, this mBridge project is actually a central bank digital currency, or a CBDC project, which is in collaboration with China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE. And apart from this mBridge project, Saudi Arabia has also become part of BRICS, which is led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And the BRICS bloc is now coming up with their own BRICS currency. They are in talks of developing a BRICS currency. Now, what is all of this leading to? First of all, Saudi Arabia not renewing the agreement, the Petrodollar Agreement, Saudi Arabia joining the Enbridge project, the CBDC project led by China, and then also the BRICS developing a new BRICS currency. What is happening? What is all of this leading to? All of these countries, specifically China and Russia, what they are trying to do is reduce their dependence on the US dollar. This whole process is known as de-dollarization. So all of this is leading to de-dollarization, the process of reducing their dependence, a country's dependence on the US dollar to conduct international transactions. It is important to understand that the US dollar is world's reserve currency, and as of 2022, about 88% of all the global transactions were actually conducted in US dollars. And on top of that, about 59% of all global currency, of all global reserves, they are actually held in the US dollars, followed by about 21% of all the global reserves that are held in euro, and only about 2.8% of all the global reserves being held in yuan. So the Chinese yuan has a long way to go if it wants to even compete with the US dollar in terms of becoming world's reserve currency. So on one hand, you have countries like Russia and China trying to reduce their dependence on the US dollar, pushing for de-dollarization. And on the other hand, you have the US, which as of now is sitting comfortably as the global reserve currency. However, it is also true that the sanctions that are being put by the US on specifically Russia, they have in a way accelerated the process of de-dollarization. Now, ever since the Russia-Ukraine war began in 2022, the dependence of Russia on the US dollar has actually reduced, because what the US has done is impose sanctions after sanctions on Russia. Not only did it impose sanctions, but it also seized about $300 billion worth of Russian assets. So, in a recent interview conducted by Tucker Carlson, Vladimir Putin actually said that before the war began, the Russia-Ukraine war began, about 80% of all foreign transactions of Russia, they were conducted in US dollars and euro. As of now, that number 80% has come down to 13%. Here's the video wherein you can have a look at what Vladimir Putin says.
What did we have here? Until 2022, about 80% of Russian foreign trade transactions were made in US dollars and euros. US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar. We had no such intention. It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars.
And after the sanctions being imposed by US, Russia has sought to settle transactions in local currencies. As a matter of fact, the ruble-yuan trade actually grew over 80 times in just 8 months after the war began. In fact, the volume of Chinese-Russian trade actually grew to about 200 billion yuan by December 2022. Now, BRICS countries, they've also started to settle their bilateral trade agreements in their local currencies. Now, efforts to reduce the dependence on US dollars, they've been going on for a while now, specifically by China. However, the Russia-Ukraine war as well as the trade war between the US and China, they have a significant role to play in acceleration of the whole process of de-dollarization. With the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia actually ditching the US dollar, China would actually aim at increasing yuan's share in the world reserve currency. So this is actually how this particular move by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia impact the US dollar as well as the global crude oil prices, the crude oil market as a whole. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that the Petrodollar Agreement is out of the equation. Saudi Arabia is now open to settling transactions in multiple different currencies, so it does not have to depend on the US dollar, which means that Saudi Arabia and the rest of the world, they do not have to hold the US dollars to conduct transactions for purchasing oil, which could potentially decrease the demand of the US dollars. And not only could it potentially impact the demand of the US dollars, but it could also impact the treasuries, the US treasuries being sold. Now, if countries, they do not have to depend on the US dollar to purchase oil, they do not even have to hold US treasuries in the market, which could have a double negative impact, not only on the dominance of the US dollar, but also on the US economy, because now the US economy will be getting less money from the rest of the world to basically purchase its debt. That could impact the US government's ability to raise capital from the rest of the world. However, this also means that now oil will not be denominated in US dollars. It could be denominated in multiple other currencies, which would impact the oil prices in the market. It would lead to volatility in the oil market, at least in the short term. And it could even lead to inflation in countries that are heavily reliant on importing oil. Now, oil market could become unstable because now we have multiple currencies that are going to be used for conducting transactions and settling payments for oil purchases. Now, this particular move could also increase the tensions between the US and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because when this particular agreement, the Petrodollar Agreement, was in place, it ensured the dominance of the US dollar in the world. And now that the agreement is gone, the US will have to rethink its strategic ties with Saudi Arabia and even the rest of the Middle Eastern countries, specifically oil exporting Arab nations. However, given the fact that about 88% of all global transactions being settled in US dollars as of 2022 and 59% of all global reserves being held in the US dollars, as well as the fact that US dollars being used as a stable form of currency in underdeveloped and developing countries, it does not seem that US dollar is going away anytime soon, because US dollar still remains to be the stable currency in the world, and specifically in the current times wherein multiple countries, they're actually going through economic crisis around the world, and as a result of the economic crisis that they're facing, their local currencies, they tend to be unstable. So the US dollar is the only stable currency in the world that the world can rely on as of now. However, it is also true that the more the US tries to weaponize the US dollar and impose multiple sanctions on multiple different countries, this move could accelerate the process of de-dollarization. So at this point of time, the US would really have to rethink all of its strategies if it wants the US dollar to remain the dominant currency in the world. So with that being said, do you think that the US dollar is going away anytime soon? And how do you look at de-dollarization? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you found this video valuable, please share this video with your friends and family. Thank you for watching this video and have a great day.